These Mastery in Commerce private sessions, hereinafter sessions, are the private exchange of ideas and concepts between the providers and the recipients. The content is not meant as legal advice. The use or attempted use of any idea or procedure discussed in these sessions, as applied to the recipient's own personal transactions, cases, or controversies, or applied to other cases, may or may not result in a favorable outcome or the same outcome as discussed in these sessions. Each transaction, case, or controversy may be different as a result of unique actions or unique statements made by the parties therein, and each different act or statement in any transaction affects or may affect whether any procedure or idea discussed in these sessions is relevant to the recipient's transaction or that the outcome thereof will be depicted as in these sessions. The discussion of ideas or procedures in these sessions is not exhaustive of the subject being discussed. Many ideas and concepts that can affect the outcome of any legal or commercial procedure are not discussed in these sessions, and the fact that the recipients may not be aware of these issues may have an adverse effect on the outcome of the recipient's procedure. It is the responsibility of the recipients to understand their own transactions and to apply the appropriate and complete concepts necessary for a procedural and substantive remedy thereto. These sessions may not be redistributed by any recipient.
Okay, welcome. This is Building a New World Through Private Commerce. Today we'll be discussing and going over many aspects, what I consider the essential aspects of operating in private commerce and the advantages and what we can create as a result of having the competency and the knowledge and the skills necessary to operate in private commerce. It's nothing short of being able to change the world and offers you things as small as being able to obtain goods and services through private markets that may not be available to you in public markets. So, without further ado, so, private commerce, what is it? Commerce is the exchange of anything and everything, from goods and services to ideas, communications, you name it. If it's being exchanged, it is commerce. Now, the term we use, we'll use the term private in many regards and with many combinations of terms in this webinar. What we mean by private is by your own right and authority, meaning you're not operating under the authority or the jurisdiction of someone else or by a right granted to you by someone else, that you're operating under an inalienable right that you were born into this world with. Okay. Why? The reason, or the reason why private commerce and operating in private commerce is important and it's significant is that we can engage with technologies and build communities and provide things to our families, our friends, build a new paradigm of peace and abundance. It's about responsibility and freedom and sovereignty. Sovereignty is a combination of freedom and responsibility, and without those things and without competently being able to operate outside of the public world, you cannot truly embrace that which you were born with, which is sovereignty. Every human being on this planet is born sovereign until they give it away and they grant someone authority over them, or they choose to become subject to some other authority. So some of the things that I've listed out here, energy technologies. There are several groups now working around the planet with various energy technologies that draw energy from the atmosphere, from the earth. These are what we would call quantum energy technologies. And although some of them are attempting to go into the public market with these things, what I know from people who have tried that in the past is that oftentimes they get shut down, and not necessarily just in a, oh, you can't do that kind of way, but in a way that subverts everything that they're doing and basically leaves them broke, penniless, sometimes not living anymore. So these aren't new technologies, as well as the healing technologies that are out there, but they're technologies that have been suppressed from the public, hence the need to engage in private markets, private commerce, in order to obtain these technologies. And with these technologies, we can build communities that have unlimited supply of clean water, unlimited supplies of nourishing food. We can create a new, free, sustainable economic system in the private. Now, there's lots of talk around the campfire of things going on right now in the world, and a lot of it good and a lot of it bad, depending on how you interpret the situations. But there's a power struggle happening. You see that there's a lot of talk about currencies being reset, new banking systems being put into place, old banking systems being done away with, old power structures being pulled apart, new power structures being built. And that's great, but there's something that we, the people, should take into account, that a new system does not necessarily mean a better system. If we start to equip ourselves and build the foundations for a society where we govern, where we control, then we don't have to rely on some group out there to reset the economic system or build a new economic system or give us currencies to use. Okay, so starting at how. In order to operate in private commerce, we're going to be talking about creating and operating what we call private entities, establishing and engaging with what we call private networks, authoring and executing what we call private contracts, and using and perpetuating private currencies, as well as establishing and exchanging in private markets, all essential elements to properly and effectively operate in private commerce. Now, private entities, as we define them here, are entities established under sovereign authority, or what we call sui juris. This is a Latin term, by my own right and authority, not by the authority of someone else. So you may be familiar with other structures, such as corporations, LLCs, and the such. These are entities formed under the authority of another entity, not yourself. So, for example, if you incorporate within a particular state or organize an LLC within a particular state, you're doing so under the authority of that state. They are giving you a benefit and privilege of operating an entity under their protection, under their guidelines, under their benefits and privileges. Okay? A private entity does not have any benefits, privileges, or protections of any other entity because it's created under the authority of the individuals, not some third party. Now, some of the private entities, some of the possible ways of using private entities is to create and operate what we call a private express trust organization. Now, this is an entity which I prefer over all others because it offers multiple benefits. For one, Private Express Trust Organization allows me to operate in private contracts, dealing in private markets, and dealing with other private parties. So under basically the authority of the parties and party for which I represent in any and all contracts. So not under the authorities or protections of anyone else. Plus, it has the added benefit of protecting assets from public entities. So the structure of the Private Express Trust Organization is it's a private contract entity that is recognized worldwide for its protection and the aspects of its protection. It's basically something that, if established under what we call common law, it is an entity that no public entities can interact with or seize the assets of or exert any kind of authority over with regards to doing business. Okay, there's an entity that exists outside the authority of all other entities, merely under the authority of the private contract itself. So if the contract itself grants authority to individuals who are parties to the contract, those are the only parties with any kind of authority or power, are the ones that are expressly given such authority and power in the contract itself, especially with regards to assets. Now, you have a lot of these same aspects in some of these other structures we'll discuss, such as the next item down, private companies. Private companies also are a private structure, also established under the right and authority of the individuals who create it, also something that is, or you could choose for it to be something established under what we call the common law, and therefore it can be recognized as an entity worldwide, but does not operate under the authority of any entity. So both of these first two structures that we've talked about, when established under common law, they're based by individuals under their own right and authority, by two sovereigns. These entities basically become sovereign entities. So really, in the public world, the world of international organizations and governments and things of that like, they stand at the same level as what we would call a nation. So we have what we call international law, or the law of nations. And these entities really operate with regards to other entities that they contract with as a nation, so under the law of nations, which is a form of common law. We also have on this list what we call private communities. Private communities, again, are established under the rights and authorities of all the community members. Now, there's actually movements all around the world right now with regards to creating these types of communities. And some of the ones that I've seen, some of the ones we're working with, and some of the ones that I've seen that we're not working with, are savvy and aware that they must have some kind of an educational system in place in order for their members to understand the nature of jurisdiction, authority, sovereignty, and things like that. Because in order for a private community to truly be successful and be maintained, the community members themselves must have a level of understanding, and they must be clear on the distinction of jurisdiction, authority, political status, and things like that nature. So we also have the possibility of creating what we call private membership clubs. So these could be established for the purposes of creating a network of individuals that want to engage in some form of commerce that is, for example, right now in the United States, under the influence of the big food companies or seed companies like Monsanto. They're attempting to outlaw all forms of private gardening and things of that nature, outlawing things like a privately grown organic foods, raw milk, and things of that nature. Now, a network of individuals can get together and provide for themselves a market for these types of things through such a structure as a private membership club. And again, it's an entity where each member must have an understanding of the nature of the venue, jurisdiction, political status, and things like governing law of contracts, such that they can operate within this club successfully. And if anyone attempts to derail what they're doing or just obstruct them in what they have chosen to get together for and whatever they're exchanging, having that understanding and having all the members having that understanding would be very important in maintaining the integrity of such a club. And then, of course, there's operating as the private people. I may use the word individual, although that word is a little bit loaded because of some public entity's definition of it, and I may use the word sovereign. This is how you were born. And in reality, there was probably never an expressed, well, this is how most people are born. There may be out there some unknown, tribal structure, something like that, where there is no understanding of this type of sovereignty that you're born with. But in the civilized world, especially with all the members of what we call the United Nations, there's recognition under their own Declaration of Human Rights. Not that that's where you get the authority to be sovereign and born that way, just a recognition that you were born that way, and that at some point you become a subject, or in most cases at some point you become a subject. Now here in the United States, it's unique in that subjecthood is only implied, that it is never expressed. So there is no actual overt contract or declaration where at one point in your life you said, yes, I wish to be a subject of the United States. Now, many elements of the government of the United States believe that you were born what they call a U.S. citizen. But this would be against their own law, or within their own constitution. They have outlawed what is known as involuntary servitude. And to be born a subject is involuntary servitude. So you cannot be born a U.S. citizen. At some point, you must choose it. However, because it never overtly, this choice is never overtly made, acts and actions are used to imply that such subjecthood was requested or accepted by each individual. But there's actually nothing that overtly puts you into that subject nature. Now, some of the important distinctions of a private entity, whether we're talking about the individual sovereign or the private express trust or a private company or a private community, is understanding these three very important distinctions. First, there's status. What I mean by status is typically I'll refer to this as political status. So in what we were just talking about, we talk about U.S. citizen. Now, the U.S. citizen is a form of subject. But the political status is that of subjecthood. So that is an important distinction to understand in operating in private contract, in private commerce. You must learn the ins and outs of status and how it is implied and how it is presumed and how to rebut the presumption of a political status or a particular political status. Another form of political status is sovereignty. So status is really determined by, one, what you declare. If you declare yourself to be a U.S. citizen, then you've declared yourself to be subject, and that's all that it takes in order to be a subject. But it's also through your acts and actions, which is both on the part of choosing U.S. citizenship or choosing to operate as a sovereign. It's through your acts and actions and how you operate that really are indicative of your political status. Another important distinction to understand is authority. Authority is, we've already talked about in several contexts, but in the important aspects of authority to understand is that authority only exists when it is granted. So for instance, you can grant the government of the United States or the government of Canada or the government of the United Kingdom or any other political subdivisions of those entities, you can grant them authority. Now again, this has probably not been done expressly, except maybe in some forms like the driver's license, which is a form of granting authority, where you are expressly agreeing to grant certain elements of the state certain authority. Okay. As well as even the registration of a vehicle, which is a form of creating trust. And when you create a trust, you grant some authority. So even in the private trust that we discussed earlier, the grantor is granting authority to a trustee. And when you register something, you're granting authority to someone. Okay, so in the registration of a vehicle, what you've done is grant authority to the state. In exchange, you get certain privileges and protections of the state with regards to the vehicle, but in reality, you've granted authority over the vehicle to the state. Okay, so understanding how authority is granted. Authority is granted expressly through contract, like the driver's license. It's done through actions, such as the registration of a car, because it's not expressed necessarily in the registration of the car that you are granting authority to some party for some purpose, but that's the nature of trust, and that's the nature of registration. What you get in return for, quote-unquote, registering your car is a certificate. It's like a certificate of interest in a trust. So they call it a certificate of title. It's not the actual title to the vehicle, but it is a certificate. The certificate indicates that a trust has been created. So whenever you have application, registration, and certification, you have a trust. And that's what happens. You apply to the Department of Motor Vehicles for a certificate of title, for a registration. They register you, which is what a trustee does when assets are placed in the trust. They register the assets. And then in a trust, the trustee issues a certificate of interest to the grantor, which is what they do to you through the Department of Motor Vehicles. They issue you a certificate of interest, known as a certificate of title. So authority is another important distinction to understand in dealing in private entities. Jurisdiction. Jurisdiction is another really important distinction to understand, and to understand what it applies to and what it does not apply to. I think there's a misconception that somehow jurisdiction is tied to physical borders. For instance, we have a border between the United States and Mexico. So it may be assumed that on one side of that border that one entity has quote-unquote jurisdiction. On the other side of that border, another entity has quote-unquote jurisdiction. But jurisdiction really is a law form that you elect. Okay, so for instance, you could execute a contract between two entities in the public, we'll say. Say it's between two corporations, one corporation from Nevada, one corporation from California. And these entities, through their languaging in the contract, establish various jurisdictions. First, they're going to make a statement in the contract of where the contract is being executed. And the terms that they use for the location of the execution imply a certain jurisdiction. So for instance, if they give it's being executed on this such and such day of such and such year in the state of California, then they've implied that the state of California is a jurisdiction. It is not the territory or the land you may refer to as California. The state of California is a jurisdiction. Okay. Now they may also have a clause in this contract where they talk about this contract shall be construed and enforced under the laws of the state of Nevada. Now they've brought another jurisdiction into the contract. So now the state of California is part of the contract, and the state of Nevada is part of the contract. These are two distinct jurisdictions, but don't confuse jurisdictions with land or territory, because you can be in a place on the land and elect to be within several different jurisdictions. So for example, you may elect to be through a contract, let's say, you may express. That's a form of electing jurisdiction, is when you express it. You may express in a contract and elect to be within, and that's a term to understand within and without with regards to jurisdiction, because when you say within, and then after the term within you use the name of a jurisdiction, you're indicating that the contract or the authority under which the contract is being executed is under that jurisdiction. So you could say within the city of Huntington Beach, you could say within the county of Orange, and you could say within the state of California, and you could say within the United States. So you've got, at that point, 4 different jurisdictions overlaying each other. And all are now part of that contract. Okay, because you have expressed within the contract that it is within a certain jurisdiction. Now, you may also, standing in the same place on the land, execute that contract without the city of Huntington Beach, without the county of Orange, without the state of California, and without the United States. Now, you've actually cut all of those jurisdictions out of the contract. And you may say that it is executed under common law. So now you've brought a different authority or law form into it. Not that common law has a jurisdiction. Okay? So jurisdiction is a law form which can be elected. Okay? Typically, the law form elected is applicable to the territory. So for instance, the place I'm standing in Huntington Beach, I can apply the laws of the city of Huntington Beach. I can apply the laws of the county of Orange. I can apply the laws of the state of California, and I can apply the laws of the United States. But if I were standing in the Philippines, it could not be implied that any of those jurisdictions had power in the contract. Not that I couldn't express it, because I could express that the United States is the governing law of the contract, even if I'm executing it in the Philippines, which now puts it within the jurisdiction of the United States, even though I'm standing in the Philippines when I execute it. Okay, moving on. Okay, the next essential, very significant aspect of operating within private commerce is the private network. I define a private network as a network of private entities that operate and interact pursuant to privacy and confidentiality standards. Now, we're going to be talking a lot about privacy, anonymity, confidentiality, and the reason why those are such important aspects in private commerce is that many of you may be aware that, with this recently, within the last couple of years, we've had disclosures by people like Mr. Snowden. Basically says the government is watching and listening to everything you do. They listen to all the phone calls. They read all the emails. They in some way, shape, or form are monitoring every form of communication we have, right? Which basically, for me, the way I interpret that is that's notice. You've been given notice that your communications are public, that they are not private, that they are being monitored by a public entity. And therefore, all those communications are now public communications. Your emails, phone calls, anything and everything that they monitor is a form of public communication. So in order to operate in a private network, you're going to need to learn how to use tools with regards to maintaining and establishing anonymity, privacy, confidentiality. How are we going to do that? Okay, so we want to establish and maintain communication privacy. And we will show some of the tools that we can use in doing that, establishing and maintaining communication privacy. We're going to want to establish and maintain information privacy. For instance, the data on your computers is information. Do you know how to keep it private? Do you know how to use tools of encryption? Things of that nature to maintain private information. We're going to look at establishing and maintaining identity privacy. Okay. Now there are various practices and methods and technologies that can be used to maintain a private identity, and we'll look at some of those. We want to be able to create private connections. And when I say connections, I mean if I am choosing to operate within a private commercial context, I need to find others that are wanting to operate within a private commercial context, and then set up some kind of standard of privacy and confidentiality by agreement of those who I choose to connect with within these private networks. We need to create and maintain systems of mutual trust. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well. These are, when you're operating in the context of privacy, anonymity, confidentiality, you may not necessarily know who you're dealing with. And in order to be successful and be effective in operating in private networks, we're going to need to learn how to establish systems such that we can create trust. And we will talk about some of that as well. Okay, so here's some tools that are commonly used in and effective for maintaining private networks. First, we have anonymization. Okay, there are several methods to anonymizing what you do with regards to communication. Now, here I've got some that are mentioned here that have to do primarily with the Internet, because it's probably the cheapest, most effective form of anonymous communication if you use these tools. Now, there are other forms of anonymization. For instance, using what they call a burner, right? You can buy cell phones that are with cash that aren't attached to any account or anything and are literally not connected to an individual. Now, to truly use those effectively, you'd also want to be using some form of voice distortion technology so that the phone and the number, the connections that you make with it could never be connected to you if you truly wanted to use that phone anonymously. Or there are other ways as well, and we'll talk about those in a little bit when we get to encrypted phone calls. So the technologies mentioned here in parentheses, Tor, VPNs, and proxies. These are technologies available on the Internet. Tor is what's known as the onion router. VPNs are what we call virtual private networks. There's also VPSs, virtual private servers, which are systems that you can use from remote location to do work over the Internet, and proxy. Now, when using these three, especially in conjunction with each other, it's a very effective tool for maintaining not only anonymity but security as well. So there are technologies you want to look at. There are technologies you want to learn about and become competent with. if you truly want to operate within a private network, you need to learn how to maintain private communications. That means even keeping private what you do on the internet, where you go on the internet, what sites you visit, what you do there, is an important aspect of operating within a private network. Another important aspect is being able to encrypt messages and files. Now, a technology that I find very easy to use and very secure is what we call PGP. Now, PGP was originally a commercial implementation of a technology that the government tried shutting down. So when they tried shutting it down, the inventor actually released the source code of it such that the world could use it to secure their communications and things like that. And that technology became known as GPG. So they're really the same technology. So when you see a reference to PGP or GPG, it's really the same technology, except PGP was the original proprietary technology, and GPG is the open source technology, but it's basically the same technology. Okay? And you can use that technology to encrypt emails, to encrypt files on your computer. You can use it in conjunction with, cloud services like Dropbox and Box.com to keep, if you want to store files there for security in case, your computer crashes or gets stolen or whatever, that you can know that not only have you saved your files somewhere, but that you can keep them secure. So these are technologies that can be used. There are other ways of maintaining that as well, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. There's also methods for encrypting phone calls. And this technology is basically using some kind of a voice over IP service, an app on your phone that functions with what we call the protocols of ZRTP and TLS. When using a voice over IP application on a phone that utilizes these technologies, and again, both sides must be using this technology and both must be implementing these protocols, your phone calls cannot be monitored or listened to. From the point of contact, they are encrypted. So if anyone were to intercept any of the communication, all that would be intercepted would be encrypted mumbo jumbo that would take literally massive amounts of computer hardware and resources to decrypt. And trust me, nobody's going to spend that kind of money or time to decrypt your communication. But it's literally the number of resources are astronomical in order to successfully decrypt these forms of encryption or PGP and GPG encryptions. They're actually very secure systems of encryption and impossible for anyone without a supercomputer network to crack. Well, again, provided you use some practices in the establishment of your keys and things like that that make them harder to crack. So that's where, what you choose as passwords and passphrases and things like that will actually determine the complexity of the encryption and the difficulty in decrypting your communication. There are also practices around and revolving around pseudonyms, use of pseudonyms, what we call handles, screen names, things like that, and passwords. And there's actually very important practices to take into consideration, not just choosing to use pseudonyms, not just choosing to use handles in the use of passwords, which is pretty much essential in every system you use, but it's actually the specific passwords you use and the specific pseudonyms you use and the handles you use, because people will do things that really connect these pseudonyms, handles, and passwords to themselves unknowingly. Doing things like using your birth date, your password, or doing things like having your name in the pseudonym or your initials or the street you grew up on or whatever. These are just common mistakes people make. And if you're truly wanting to operate in a private network, you're going to want to understand and learn the effective practices establishing these pseudonyms, handles, and passwords. There are also things out there, what we would call anonymizing services or anonymous services, and other forms of secure communication out there. We're just touching on a few here, and I feel like I've touched on, the ones that most people use, which is messaging, phone calls, and internet surfing. So those three cover probably 90% of your communication, because even if you're, a texting hound, we'll actually, later on in this webinar, we'll show you there are actually technologies out there that encrypt from point to point, the equivalent of text messages. You wouldn't be using the actual text messaging service on your phone. You'd be using an application that encrypts it from point A to point B through a special key system as well. Okay, so now let's look at private contracts. Okay, so private contracts. These are the terms and conditions by which private entities engage each other in commercial exchanges. Okay, and how do we do that? So what's essential in creating private contracts is that you express within the contract the authority, political status, and the governing law. So the authority under which it's being executed, i.e. sui juris, by each individual party to the contract, that each is executing it under their own right and authority. The political status of the entity. So expressing that each individual is not subject to a particular territory, or that each individual is sovereign, or something along those lines. Having those terms expressed within the contract. And governing law. If you've ever dealt in contracts, you've seen almost all contracts have a governing law clause. And so it's important for you to eliminate any ambiguity when you're executing or authoring a private contract. And one way to eliminate ambiguity is to express what the governing law of the contract is. So for instance, expressing that the law shall be interpreted and enforced and governed under common law, or under the law of nations, or under the law merchant, or under private international law. Whatever it is you choose, make sure you express it such that it can't be implied that it is some other governing law, like the laws of the state of California or the laws of the United States, or something along those lines. You must express the venue and jurisdiction of this, and this is done in several ways. We've talked about some of them already. In the contract, in contracts, there's usually a clause about the location that the contract is being executed. So this could imply jurisdiction. If you want to have being executed on such and such date at such and such a place, you want to make sure that the place that you've defined does not imply a public jurisdiction. So, we've gone so far in the past as using the location of the execution of a contract and defining it by metes and bounds, so such that it's being executed on the land. And when we state that the governing law is common law, and we state that the location of the execution is on the land defined by metes and bounds, that we have not allowed the opening for the implication for implying that it is in some other jurisdiction. So we don't use words like the city of this or the state of that. Sometimes we may refer to counties, but we're very careful about how we do that. And we may say something like executed within Orange County without the county of Orange, without state of California, and without the United States. To expressly state that the contract is being executed within a particular political jurisdiction that is a de jure form of government, as opposed to the de facto form of government that operates the state of California or the county of Orange or the United States. Okay. We want to express. Now, this is a very important element in all your private instruments, including, well, all of these so far that we've stated are important in everything, not only contracts for, let's say, a particular commercial transaction, but also when we talked earlier about private entities. When creating a private entity, typically there's an instrument that you use in order to create this private entity. And you want to make sure that all of these elements are also within your instrument that creates your private entity. So very, very, very important clause to have within the contract or in the instruments that establish your private entities is a private dispute resolution clause. Now what this is this is a clause that basically states that if there is any dispute within the contract, that the parties agree that some private third party is granted the authority to adjudicate and enforce any resolutions to the dispute. Okay. Now, by doing this, you're protecting yourself really against outside intrusion into the contract and against the other party of the contract attempting to take this into a public venue. Because if, let's say, the party that you're contracting with decides that they want to try to sue you in a public court, which would destroy the private nature of the contract, and therefore it would convert you on governing law, it would convert you on political status, it would convert the authority and the jurisdiction, everything would be undone. But by having in there an express clause that if that expressly granted the authority to a private third party, all you would need to do in that scenario is bring a redacted form of your contract to the court, show the judge the clause with the private dispute resolution, and the judge would kick it out of his court because he would see that both parties agreed that he has no authority. Some other party has been given authority. Now, this is something that has pulled apart many private entities and private contracts, is when some party decides they want to go to court and there wasn't an expressed clause in there on how disputes would be resolved. And because you've now taken it to a public venue, public jurisdiction, you've converted everything. It's no longer a private contract. And as far as the court's concerned, the parties are no longer private. So it changes the whole character of the contract and the parties. So it's a very important clause to include in your instruments to establish your private entities and any and all contracts that you engage with private parties. We also like to put in what we call a franchise waiver. A franchise waiver is basically a clause. Well, first let's talk about what a franchise is. A franchise is something like the United States or the state of California. A franchise waiver is waiving any benefits, privileges, rights, or protections that a franchise offers. So for instance, if someone declares themselves to be a U.S. citizen, there are certain rights, protections, and privileges that they get as by virtue of being in that political status. If someone declares themselves to be a California resident, okay, the state of California is another franchise. So these franchise waivers are basically waivers that the party is agreeing to waive all benefits, privileges, rights, and protections of any and all franchise to which they may or may not be a member of at the time of the contract. And then you would include, you would say including but not limited to, and then you would state any and all franchises that any party of the contract that it may be interpreted that they are a part of. So you may say something like including but not limited to the United States, the state of California, the county of Orange, the city of Huntington Beach, the American Bar Association, whatever it is, any authority, any authority that has a system of law that or protection for its members, okay, for its franchises, because that's what you are as a U.S. citizen. You are a member of a franchise. or the state, or a resident of the state of California, or a resident of the county of Orange, or a resident of the city of Huntington Beach, or a member of the American Bar Association. All of these offer certain rights, privileges, protections to its members. And so having a clause in there where they waive any and all protections, rights, and benefits. So again, it's like putting a nail in the coffin with regards to the dispute resolution clauses and the governing law clauses and things like that. Okay. Again, you want to express confidentiality, having within your contracts and your instruments to establish your private entities clauses around confidentiality, that the parties are agreeing that everything with regards to the conduct of the parties with regards to this contract are to be held confidential. And you may even want to build into the contract agreement of some penalty for breaching the confidentiality. And again, empowering your private dispute resolution party to enforce this penalty for breaching confidentiality. Okay, and you want to make sure that in the formation of private contracts that you are engaging as private parties and using private currencies in the exchange. This is not a good idea to execute a private contract through a private party and use any public forms of currency, whether they be checks or credit cards or PayPal transactions or cash, cash issued by some public central bank. You want to make sure that the parties and the currencies are private, and therefore, again, not creating any ambiguity, whereas it could be implied through your use of a public currency that you've granted public authority. I don't know if you heard recently where the United States seized funds out of a foreign bank. Now, this foreign bank supposedly is under the authorities and protections of the foreign government, which is a sovereign entity with regards to the United States, and therefore should be protected against the United States coming in and seizing funds. However, because this bank held balances of U.S. dollars, it is implied that they are granting authority to the United States in order to seize funds from that bank. So that's how things like that happen, is by the bank, the foreign bank, using the currency, by keeping balances in the currency. They granted authority to the issuer of that currency to be able to intervene in their business affairs. Okay? And you're going to want to learn to use cryptography, digital signatures, third-party adjudication and enforcement to protect the parties and to keep the terms and conditions of your contracts private and confidential. So what do I mean by that? You can actually execute contracts and have the contracts, including your instruments that establish entities, be encrypted. So for instance, if I'm creating a trust and the trust indentures themselves are encrypted and digitally signed, if anyone were to ever get their hands on these documents, these instruments, they wouldn't be able to read them. They'd be impenetrable, which is always a danger with regards to private entities, is having someone get their hands on it and then therefore knowing all the elements to the private entity or knowing all the elements to a private contract so that they can try to exploit or attack different aspects of either the entity or the contract. By learning how to competently use cryptographic or encryption technologies, which again, this could all be done with that PGP technology. Learning PGP can be very valuable in the private commercial world because you can use it to encrypt your contracts, you can use it to digitally sign and verify your contracts, and only make it accessible to the parties and maybe your third-party adjudicator, and thereby protecting the parties and the terms and conditions of the contract, maintaining privacy and confidentiality. Okay, so now we're going to look at private currency. private currency is a medium of exchange and or a store of value that has no central authority. It is decentralized and facilitates commercial transactions securely and anonymously. Okay. Now, one of the best forms of private currency out there that I have just fallen in love with in the work that I do within private entities and private trusts and things like that are what are termed cryptocurrencies. These cryptocurrencies are digital currencies that exactly meet the definition above of being a medium exchange and a store of value, and they have no central authority. No one can control them. No one controls the issue of them. No one controls the transactions of them. No one can control the balances within individual banks, because in reality, when you learn this technology, which is a fairly simple technology to understand and to utilize, you understand that you are a bank, or your wallet, as they call it, your digital wallet, is its own bank. There is no bank out there that can seize funds from it. It's a great system especially for private entities engaged in private contracts. It is by far my preferred system, probably the most superior system of the most superior medium of exchange available as far as simplicity of use and security and anonymity. So how do we use these? How do we access and use and implement private currency? So we can use cryptocurrencies and transactions between private entities and by exchange in private contracts. We could also use commodities such as gold, silver, other precious metals, gems in transactions between private entities and by exchange in private contracts. We can use privately issued currency. And this is something you learn about when you start to deal in the private entities and especially the private express trust, is units of interest within the trust actually are a form of private currency that are actually issued by the trust itself. So you can actually, once you learn how to effectively use a private entity, you can learn how to issue private currency and use it on a small scale, because it's not as widely, your units of interest in a trust that you may be managing are not as widely accepted as cryptocurrencies, whereas cryptocurrencies are globally accepted. That's what makes them so powerful, is that not only are they globally accepted as far as private entities and in private markets, but they're globally accepted by public entities as well. So it's a very effective tool in comparison to commodities and private issue currency. Gold, silver, not really ideal in transactions. I've actually had gold and silver stolen in the attempt to use them in transactions through the mail and delivery systems such as UPS and FedEx and things like that. So they're not very reliable. It's a very high risk medium of exchange. Great store of value, gold and silver, but not a great medium of exchange. And you can also use what I'll call private negotiable instruments, which are, again, these aren't instruments created under the authority of some governing body. These are instruments created by private parties. So, for instance, notes, bonds, drafts, things like that between and by private parties in transactions between private entities and by exchange in private contracts as well. Okay, let's take a look at some of the aspects of the cryptocurrency. These are things like Bitcoin. I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have heard of these. So again, cryptocurrencies are decentralized. There is no central authority to them. They operate as a medium of exchange and a store of value. The transactions are secure and anonymous, especially when you understand how to maintain the security and anonymity of your transactions, which is also something that you must learn to do. It's not inherent necessarily in it if you don't understand how to secure your wallet and things like that. your transactions eventually could be tracked and linked to you unless you learn how to use some of these other technologies along with your wallet technologies in order to make your security and anonymity of your transactions bulletproof. And it is possible. It's just it doesn't come with just the wallet itself and understanding how to send and receive the cryptocurrency. There is global acceptance and accessibility to private currencies. In fact, what is it, Ecuador, one of the South American countries right now, is seriously considering divorcing itself from the central banking system and actually issuing its own cryptocurrency as its currency for the country itself, which will be very interesting to see where that goes. This would be the first time a government has embraced the technology of cryptocurrency and talked about implementing it as a medium of exchange and store of value and the official currency for their nation. Bitcoin and other forms of cryptocurrencies are what we call lawful money. Oh, wait, before I get into that, the unique thing about cryptocurrencies is they operate both as a currency and a payment network. And what do I mean by that? So, for instance, the U.S. dollar is a form of currency. Now, Visa and MasterCards are forms of payment networks, and PayPal is a form of a payment network. But you see, these things are separate and distinct from the U.S. dollar. So you have the currency U.S. dollar, and there are these various payment networks, and they all tax you ridiculously for basically just facilitating your transaction, right? Whereas all the cryptocurrencies operate not only as currencies, but they actually operate as the payment network as well. There is no separate payment network for cryptocurrencies. The cryptocurrency wallet, that is your bank, operates as a function, a node within the payment network. So it's, again, something that no other currency on the planet can claim to have its own inherent or built-in payment network, and therefore all transactions around the world are taxed at some level because you have to use these payment networks. Unless you're using cash only, you have to use these, which if you get paychecks and deposit those to bank accounts and then get those out with the ATM cards, you're going to be taxed even to get the cash. So, and your bank account fees and things like that. So you're even if you're a person who uses only cash, you're still really putting yourself on the line for being taxed just for your transaction, even in cash. So Bitcoin is what we would call lawful money. Lawful money is basically a medium of exchange where the parties of the transaction agree to accept it and to issue it for the meeting of obligations, discharge of debts, and things like that. Now, it is not legal tender. What is the distinction? What is the difference between what we call lawful money and legal tender? Well, for instance, in the United States, legal tender is the U.S. dollar. In the UK, legal tender is the British pound. But in the UK, the U.S. dollar is not legal tender. And in the United States, the British pound is not legal tender, meaning the public entities are not obligated to accept British pounds for the discharge of debts or for transactions, whereas they are obligated to take U.S. dollars. That is the distinction between legal tender and lawful money. Lawful money, it is agreed upon by the parties to use it as a medium of exchange, whereas legal tender obligates the subjects of a governing body to accept that as a form of money. And again, I mentioned earlier, the cryptocurrencies have what they call a wallet. This is really, it's a form of technology. It's not really a wallet in the sense of the standard definition, but it is a client or a node within the network that is unique to a file that you store and can secure. And again, you have to learn how to secure this file, how to keep copies of this file in different places, because if you were to lose this file, you lose the money. It's gone. There's no way to get it back. And that's partly why it's so secure. So just learning simple things like how to encrypt the file and places to keep it where you know it won't be tampered with or that it won't be lost or destroyed. And I use many different methods of keeping backups, so to speak, of these files. All of them encrypted, all of them stored in secure locations. And the cool thing about it is once you've passphrase encrypted your wallet, you can keep copies of it anywhere, and you don't have to create a new copy of this file every time you do a transaction. So when you created the backup of it, you may have only had the equivalent of, 10 Bitcoins, let's say. But 10 years from now, you may have 10,000 Bitcoins, which is worth a significantly higher amount of money. That encrypted file that you stored away and hid away or secured in a vault somewhere or in a safety deposit box or on Box.com or on Dropbox or even in the form of documentation, because you can actually encrypt it and print it out and keep a offline version of the wallet in the form of paper. So it can actually be turned into paper currency and stored somewhere securely. And because it can be encrypted on the paper, it's still secure. If somebody gets their hands on the paper, they can't necessarily get your money. So that's what's unique about this technology, is that balance would be 10,000, even though when I put it away, so to speak, when I took those funds, when I made the backup of that file, I didn't have 10,000 Bitcoin, but the keys that are linked to all that money in the wallet were there in the file. So all the money is tracked on the entire network. So that's why every bank, every wallet acts as a node. There is literally a database of every transaction that actually gets stored on every single computer. So that, for one, it's another form of security, so nobody can counterfeit Bitcoin like they can counterfeit dollars. And by having that as an aspect of the technology, they can, by taking a wallet that's 10 years old and putting it back on the network, let's say after a file was destroyed or you lost it, all the transactions that were related to all the keys within your wallet would actually update your wallet to show that you have all that money. So losing the wallet, if you've secured it and stored it away somewhere, isn't like losing the money. So it's, again, probably, in my opinion, the best, most secure, most powerful form of currency on the planet at this time. Okay, so tools to be used with private currencies. So we talked about the wallet. So the version of the wallet I was talking about is what we call the local standalone wallet. Okay, this local standalone wallet is stored on your computer. There's also versions that that work with on your phone. You can actually have the currency, the wallet a version of the wallet software running on your phone. And so you can have the wallet accessible on your phone, and you can have the wallet accessible on your computer, or any computer, as long as you know how to, access and encrypt and these various wallet files. Now, there's also what we call online wallets. There are various providers out there for online wallets. I don't recommend online wallets because, for one, you're no longer the bank. You've now made a third party the bank. So really, all these online wallet providers, they're banks, where everyone is giving up their authority and their power to be a bank to one entity. And the problem with these that we've seen with several online wallet systems is if somebody hacks their system and gets access to their keys, they can take all the money being stored in their system. So, and they're the biggest target. All the big Bitcoin thefts that have happened since the inception of Bitcoin have all happened with these online wallet systems. And I wouldn't say necessarily all of them were necessarily outside jobs. I believe that several of these were inside jobs where these guys who created these online wallet systems, sitting on top of millions of dollars, decided, hey, why don't we just pretend like we got hacked, because you can't trace the money. So when all this money gets transferred to some other Bitcoin address, there's no way of tracking it. There's no way of knowing who got the funds. So it could have been the people who created the online wallet. They could have just said, oh, yeah, we got hacked, all the Bitcoins got stolen, and they could have literally sent it to themselves in their own wallets, in their own local standalone wallets, because I guarantee you they didn't have it sent to some online wallet. There's also what they call cryptocurrency mixers. Now, these are very important, especially when we start to talk about the technology of private markets or online platform private markets. Okay, because these mixers, like for instance, some of you may have heard of what's called Silk Road, which is a form of private market. It's a platform where people engage in private commerce. They're literally engaged in a private market in exchanges using private currencies like Bitcoin. But because of the nature of what they exchange, okay, we appear to be up and running and everything is okay. Okay, so mixers. These mixers become valuable in systems like that. So for instance, Silk Road is a private platform, private market, but what they're mainly transacting there is illicit drugs. So people buy cocaine and ecstasy and marijuana and things like that. Now, because you're not going to want to necessarily link your wallet to the wallets or the escrow systems within Silk Road, because there's the possibility of your wallet being linked to these illicit transactions, is people use what are known as mixers. And and there's some reputable mixers out there. And when we get to the end of the webinar, I'm going to have several resources, so we'll actually talk about trustworthy ones, ones that I've used in the past and things like that. And mixers are basically, what they do is you send in some Bitcoins or whatever cryptocurrency you're using that you wish to use in a transaction somewhere else, and these Bitcoins are mixed up in all kinds of different transactions. So literally, the Bitcoins that go in are not the Bitcoins that come out, so to speak. But they don't come back out to you. So for instance, if I wanted to deposit money on my Silk Road account so that I could buy, some illicit item, I would use this mixer. The money would go from my wallet to the mixer, and from the mixer to the Silk Road system. And then again, vice versa. If I was selling things on Silk Road, the money would go from my Silk Road account to the mixer and then to my wallet. And like I said, it's untraceable. The money that goes in is not the money that comes out. It's basically a randomized transaction system where it's like a round robin. And all this money comes in, and it's tracked how much comes in and what's supposed to go where, but it's all mixed up and sent different places. You'll get the amount that you sent in eventually, but it actually takes 24 to 48 hours so that it can mix up with all the other people who are sending money in. And because these services become more and more widely used over time, the transactions actually happen faster and faster. Whereas when these services first were being used, it could take days for a transaction to go through because you had to wait for enough money from other users to come in to be mixed up so that it wouldn't necessarily have the destination, or for the money to go to the destination there'd have to be a sufficient amount of money from other sources in order for it to go out. There's also out there cryptocurrency escrow services. And these are also important when dealing with private markets because you're not necessarily working with a seller or buyer that you trust. So in order to basically operate without the need for trust is to use an escrow service. The escrow service is one whereby the funds are put into escrow, and when it can be verified that the products or goods and services or whatever were indeed delivered, then the funds can be released. And there's also, in addition to that, a method of dispute resolution that is being offered on some of these escrow systems as well, so that it's not just you're not just dealing with a computer algorithm whether or not the funds are released or not, that it's actually, there's actually verifiable ways to determine whether or not the buyer or the seller has produced. Whereas, typically the buyer has to put up the money, but it's determining whether or not the seller. Not to mention with the internet and these online platforms, you also get an indication from all other verified buyers from this seller of how honorable they are and how prompt they are in supplying what it is they're selling, or how accurate they are in their representations of what they're selling, things like that. That's the beauty of the internet, that even though all these parties are anonymous, there's a way of knowing whether or not they're reputable. You may not know their name or where they live. You can tell from people who have done past business transactions with them, especially verified transactions. It's kind of like how Amazon has Amazon and eBay have a system by where buyers and sellers rate each other on their performance. And, of course, built into that system is the verification that you were indeed a customer, that you indeed bought something. And that they also have, various other ways of making determinations on those systems as well. So there's systems in place that minimize the need for trust between parties in a private contract, use of private currency. We also have cryptocurrency payment systems, or what I'll call debit cards. There are literally services out there, and again, we'll cover these in resources, that will allow you that if, let's say, you're keeping funds in the form of a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin or something along those lines, you can actually have it linked to an anonymous debit card so that you can actually go to the grocery store and buy groceries and not ever have to convert the Bitcoins into cash or have them deposited to a bank account or anything else, that you can actually still keep the money you spend at places that don't currently accept Bitcoin. You can still maintain anonymity in your commercial transactions through such payment systems as the various debit card systems that are out there. And then, of course, they have what are called cryptocurrency exchanges, or currency exchanges for cryptocurrency. And on these platforms, you're able to exchange one form of cryptocurrency for another, or you can exchange dollars or rubles or euros or yuan or just about, all the major world currencies. You can exchange for Bitcoins or exchange Bitcoins for these various currencies. And there are ways of maintaining anonymity even with those exchanges, and the transaction of cryptocurrencies, private currency into public currencies like euros, and still be able to get the euros out of that trading platform and still maintain anonymity. Okay, let's take a look at private markets. So private market is a platform for parties to exchange goods and services securely and anonymously, usually with an integrated system for minimizing the need for trust between the parties, i.e. an escrow system. How do we engage this private market? What do we need to know? What do we need to learn? First, we're going to need to learn how to navigate and effectively and anonymously use what we call the dark net. Now, earlier we talked about a technology when we were talking about private communication known as Tor, another word for the onion router. This was a technology developed by the Department of Defense. I believe the Office of Naval Research developed it. And it was originally developed for the government to be able to do things on the internet that could not be tracked, could not be traced. So you could have, U.S. Army hackers attacking Chinese servers, and the Chinese would not know the attack was originating on an Army base. So the nature of this technology is extraordinary, but you must know the practices to maintain the anonymity and the security of this system. So there are some practices. You could download the technology and start to learn it. I really recommend that, just so you can, not to, don't jump into private markets and things that you don't necessarily understand yet, but start to use the technology, see how it works, and learn how to use it effectively and to maintain your privacy, your anonymity, and your security, because there are certain things like allowing JavaScript to execute on your browser while using the darknet could expose your actual location, and therefore expose you personally to whatever you're doing within that session. There are certain things you need to learn in order to maintain and to be competent with the use of the darknet or the Tor, the router. You want to find platforms that function with minimum trust and risk. Okay, so again, we talked about Silk Road is one of those platforms that functions with minimum trust and minimum risk. It's actually, well, I guess it depends on what you're buying on there. I'm sure there's definitely what you're selling on there. That sure there's some risk with regards to buying and shipping illicit drugs, but they've actually worked out quite an effective system, such that very few have ever been prosecuted with in relation to the transactions on Silk Road, and it's because of practices and methods that the various parties on the system use to maintain the integrity. Okay. You're going to want to learn practices for maintaining anonymity and security, both within the Tor system and without it. You're going to want to learn to effectively and securely use cryptocurrency. Talked a little bit about that. You want to learn to securely communicate using various forms of encryption. So you can see how all the technologies we've talked about up until now kind of all come together here in the private market. That's why we finish up. That's why we end up here, is because everything we've talked about, from private entities, private networks, private currencies, private contracts, this is where it all comes together in the private market. And this is where the huge potential lies in wait for us to really embrace, and by embracing it, we can significantly change the world around us. So again, secure communication is an essential element. You really don't want to be engaged in private markets without understanding the technology of secure communication. In fact, Silk Road has a technology built into it that if you don't understand PGP, you couldn't even log into your account, because of one of the security measures that they use in order to ensure that the person logging in is indeed the person who created the account. So they've actually, and it's actually an ingenious system. I've never seen it used anywhere else before. I don't know if they pioneered it or if it was pioneered somewhere else and they've adopted it, but it's a great system for ensuring that the individual who created the account is the individual logging into the account. In fact, it should be used as a security measure on every system that requires a password login, especially systems like email and things like that, where, well, especially if you work for an entity that needs to maintain some level of security with regards to the information the email sent to and from its various employees or agents or whatever. Again, we talked about this earlier, finding trusted service providers for mixing and escrow. And again, that's related to private currency. Learn to effectively establish, manage, and administer private entities. That's an important aspect too, because that's your last line of defense. Who's engaged in the contract? You know, if if it can be implied that a U.S. person was engaged in the contract, well then it can be implied that certain authorities and laws and regulations can be enforced upon the parties of the contract. Okay, so eliminate all ambiguity. Create the entity under your own right and authority and have that be the entity that engages in contracts in private markets. You also must learn to construct private contracts that can be adjudicated and enforced by third parties. Okay. Some distinctions of private market. We're looking for, and again, I'm giving you these distinctions. These are distinctions of what already exists as private markets, but also there's a call for us to create these things, to go beyond illicit drugs. You know what I mean? Like, it's great that the technology has now been developed and that in a system, a proven, secure system has been developed because of the supply and demand of drugs in the world, but this could be used for so much more. We should be creating platforms where we can exchange energy technologies, healing technologies, water accumulation technologies, environmental cleaning technologies, things that can dramatically shift what's happening in the world, curing diseases and supplying fresh water, clean water to everyone, and unlimited supplies of organic, natural food, not Monsanto genetically modified food. There's a call. It's there. The technology has been created. Let's pursue it. Let's create platforms that go other places besides illicit drugs, things of that nature. In a private market, you're dealing in private parties, contracts, and currency. Now, this isn't necessarily a distinction understood by all these people engaged in private markets. That's one of their biggest problems. They don't understand, they don't even get the distinction of venue and jurisdiction or authority or political status or private entities and private contracts. They're using private currencies. That's about it. But they don't really understand even the significance of that. So there's definitely an educational process that needs to happen even within the private markets that are already operating, because they could, by just learning and having a deeper understanding of what they're truly engaged in, would add another layer of protection and security to what they're doing. Trustworthy third-party escrow system, essential and aspect. Again, the currency mixing services is an essential aspect to the private market. Even though we presented that as a technology under private currency, using your private currency with a mixing service in private markets is a good idea. And it just further secures your transaction and helps to protect your anonymity, your privacy, and your private commerce. Learning the methods and practices to securely and anonymously deliver goods and services. Okay, that's another, there's actually a lot that has been done on that front as far as experimentation and the ins and outs, learning the ins and outs of the various delivery systems that exist out there. Now, as far as, digital goods and services, it's very easy. But when you go beyond digital goods and services, it becomes a little trickier. But there are systems out there. And again, this is something that working within a network of people who are committed to bringing, to reestablishing a world of Republican forms of government. And I don't mean the political party Republicans, I mean a true republic, which is a government by the people. To really have those reemerge, to have those be the leading forms of government, we not only need to learn how to operate in these private contracts and in private markets, but we need to bring them. We need to start creating them. We need to start communicating within a network of people of how to do this effectively and to create even the system that will facilitate the delivery of goods and services, things of that nature. And then, of course, the private club, private network aspect of a private market, which we discussed near the beginning of the webinar, which was, a committed or dedicated small group of people that are just interested in one aspect of a market, like, raw milk or organic foods that are homegrown and things like that. Putting together a private club or a private network in order to facilitate transactions in regards to that. Okay. So I believe a new social paradigm, a new paradigm for society is possible if we truly understand and look at all of the elements that we've presented here today under the flag of private commerce, the various distinctions of private commerce that we discussed, being private entities, private contracts, private networks, private currencies, private markets. We truly embrace these, and at the very least, start to learn how to competently operate with them, because we would not have to rely on any government or corporation or banking system for our own futures. Literally, we could do away with the central banking system. I don't know if you know how significant that would actually be. In research that a company out of, I believe it was Switzerland or Sweden, one of those, they did an analysis of all the corporations in the world. And what they did was they broke down stock ownership, members of the boards of directors, and things like that. What they found was that not like over 90% of all the corporations, all the companies in the world are run by what they called a super company of about, it was a group of like 100-something companies. And when you look at what the entities that control these 100 or something companies, it's basically the same families. Remember, central banks are privately owned, and these families that own these central banks control these 120-something companies that control 90% of what's happening in the world. It's why the world is in the condition it's in, a very small group of people. We've empowered them. We've empowered them by using their banking system. We've empowered them by giving up our power and by embracing a private commercial system, embracing private entities, embracing private currencies, embracing and using private contracts and private markets. We embrace our own power. We take back our power. Literally, we could suffocate the central banks overnight if everyone just said, I'm out. I'm no longer going to use these public currencies. That literally would take away all their power if the people chose to. I'm not saying Time Warner has to choose to, because the reality is Time Warner and its controllers and backers and owners, that is the central banking system. By suffocating the central banking system, you basically, what you're doing is all those other corporations that maybe they just provide a service like AT&T, right? Well, they would have to completely change their focus, because their focus would now have to be on the people with the power, which would be the people, the masses. All the power would lie with the masses. Not to mention, with this, what we could do, literally, overnight, by embracing a private commercial system, is we can bring to the people technologies that have been suppressed. Some of these technologies have been suppressed for over 100 years. technologies that can heal any and all diseases, technologies that can provide unlimited amounts of energy without having to burn any fossil fuel, without having to take some commodity and use it as the source of fuel. Literally, the environment itself is full of energy. The earth itself is full of energy. And there have been devices that have invented over 100 years ago that can harness the energies of the environment, harness the energies of the atmosphere, harness the energies that are in the earth. And with that, we could also bring to the foreground the technologies that can clean the environment. They exist. We can completely undo what's been done for the last couple hundred years since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Our environment's been destroyed, and it could be repaired by implementing these suppressed technologies. Water accumulation technologies. We can go to the middle of the desert. Through resonance technology and water accumulation technology, turn deserts into lush, fertile farmland. Literally, no one on this planet need be without food or water or shelter. And our technology is at a place where we could automate almost everything. We could create the kind of world we want to live in. We could create a place where literally the automation of our own world is literally does not work with our an economic system that necessitates scarcity. Our current economic system necessitates scarcity. It cannot work in a completely automated society because you need there to be scarcity. And as soon as you start automating everything, there's nothing for anyone to do. If there's nothing for anyone to do, there's nothing for them to work for. So there's no reason for money. And so the system of scarcity has to be done away with in a world of automation. You have to implement something new. And we can bring that something new to the foreground. We can be the foundation of it, the people. We don't need to wait for some group, some entity. The BRICS and all the talk that's going on about all the people who are doing something to save the world. We can step up and save the world. We have everything we need. It's all right there. We just need to embrace it. Embrace our own monetary system. Embrace our own system of laws and contracts and commerce. Embrace our own authority and power. Create our own systems of resolving disputes. What's available is abundance. Abundance of all resources. A world of abundance that cannot exist in our current economic system. Our current economic system necessitates scarcity. You cannot have abundance. That's why you cannot have machines, generators that harness energy from the atmosphere, because that would create abundance. We need there to be scarcity. We need there to be fossil fuels as the source of our energy, and we need it to be in limited supply, because that's the way that this economic system works. What's available? Thriving, sustainable community. And we are the foundation of that. We are the ones that create that. So what now? It's about choice, about action. So we can continue to sit and wait for someone else to do it. Sit and wait for someone else to act. Or we can choose, if nothing else, to start learning. Start learning how to create the alternative. We have the power to. Why not download the Bitcoin wallet and just learn how it works? Go read up on PGP and just learn how to send encrypted email. start to do it for fun between you and your friends. If everyone used it and every email was encrypted, the NSA would be out of luck. They couldn't monitor anyone's communication because they don't nearly have the amount of computing power to decrypt every single email. What if every phone call was encrypted? No one has the computing power. The computing power does not exist on this planet to decrypt every phone call. Why not just start using it? Learn about it. I'm not saying you have to go out and start a movement to save the world. Just start learning how to be at the foundation, to work with the tools that could create it. Because with enough competent people there, it could be something that could be implemented overnight. If everyone just knew it, understood it to a degree of competency, that if at one point we all decided, you know what, this ain't working. This old way of doing things isn't working. Let's do it differently. And enough of us were competent enough in doing it differently. We knew how to navigate private markets. We knew how to keep all of our communications private. We knew how to engage in private contracts. We knew how to be a bank with private currency, how to transact business with private currencies. We could abandon that old system like that. Snap of a finger, create something that could have us thriving, could create a sustainable system, a sustainable economic system, a sustainable system for communities, sustainable transportation technology. It's all possible. We just have to begin to embrace it. So, look at some of the resources that are available that you're probably going to want to look up and check out. I beg you, please, just start to learn it. Because critical mass is all it takes. The critical mass isn't much. But don't just sit. If you want the world to be different, if you want it to look different, if you want it to be different, if you want to see things transform, be the catalyst for that transformation. If even you're the catalyst for your own personal transformation, act, choose. So the first two on here, these are the MIC, which this webinar is being put on by MIC. MIC offers a training program that is basically, well, we'll go into the details of what the training program is and what the privacy technology online training is. One is a 6-month training, one is a 12-week training. And they really cover two distinct aspects of everything that we've discussed here today. So those are available to you. And those are actually the next two sessions. We only do those twice a year. And so the next two sessions are coming up in October. And then it won't be happening again until, I believe, April of next year. Okay. So there's those resources. We'll talk in detail what those incorporate, what they include. Go to the Tor project website. This is the Onion Router. This is how to be anonymous and secure on the internet. And it goes beyond just web browsing. I mean, I use this technology to a high degree of competency, but I come from the world of computing and programming, so it's not much of a stretch for me to incorporate these technologies at a much more advanced level, but learn the basics. Learn how to use the browser. Learn how to browse the internet securely. Learn the distinctions. Learn what could expose you. Learn what not to do. Learn how to do it effectively, securely. Look into PGP and GPG encryption. There are two websites there. So for Tor, you can go to the torproject.org. For PGP, GPG encryption, learning how to encrypt emails, encrypt files, digitally sign files and digitally verify the signatures of files. Look into these two websites, GNUPG.org and the PGPI.org. You want to learn something? Well, actually, these websites on the VPN, VPSs, these are actually sites that offer anonymous VPN and VPS access. So if you want to learn about how to effectively use them, just do a Google search. What is a VPN? Why use a virtual private network? And then these two websites, privateinternetaccess.com and anonymousvps.com, these offer the ability for you to anonymously, so you could actually go to these websites using your Tor browser and using cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin to pay for the services and have a VPN or VPS account that is never linked to you. But first, learn about them. Why would you need them? What would you use them for? Okay. Cryptocurrencies. Want to learn about cryptocurrencies? Go to bitcointalk.org. Anything and everything about every cryptocurrency out there is on that website. Great resource for just learning. Just learn the ins and outs. Where do I get a wallet? What do I do with the wallet? How do I send money? How do I receive money? Okay? Just learn the basics. Now you'll notice these next two web addresses don't look like web addresses you've ever seen before, because to go to these next two websites, you would have to use a Tor browser. Okay, so you would have to be on the Tor network, because these URLs are not resolvable on a regular browser, on the regular internet. This is the dark net. So when people talk about the dark net, you'll see websites with this structure. Now the reason why they have this structure is the website itself is using the Tor network to host itself. So the location of the website is actually unknown, as well as the location of all the users who access it are unknown. That's why these websites have been able to operate successfully for so long, is that there's no way of knowing where the website is hosted, so you can't shut it down, and there's no way of knowing where all the users come from. So the first one on here is an example of a private market. It's known as Silk Road. This is the Silk Road 2.0. Now the first incarnation of Silk Road was taken out because the founder, the guy who created it, made some mistakes, and they were stupid mistakes. That if you do a little bit of research in how to maintain your privacy, how to maintain your security, he would have never done. Okay. I mean, I'm in awe that he made these mistakes, because he was at least intelligent enough to create the website. But his background, his come from, was more of a social experiment, and I don't think he was really that savvy in the technologies behind it all to know how to keep himself secure and safe. So he got taken out, but right after he got taken out, Silk Road 2.0 went up, and it's been up for several years now, and nobody can touch it, because the people currently administering it know enough to protect themselves, know enough not to expose themselves, know how to properly use all these technologies so that their users don't get exposed, and so that the website itself and the administrators of the website don't get exposed. Now there's also another website that's related to Silk Road, and it's their security forum. And I recommend going there, because this is where you learn all the do's and don'ts. It's a great resource of how to maintain privacy and security and use encryption technologies and all of that. It's a great resource. Okay? So the private market, Silk Road 2.0, you can see the URL there. I'm not going to say it out loud. Hopefully you all can read it. You can notice these URLs are typically very complex, because it's to get the URL, it's a function of cryptography itself. It actually generates it, and so you don't necessarily have. Some people may have the computing power to generate a key that is all a word, but typically the technology is only out there to get most people or most websites in the darknet are just a random string of letters and numbers and things like that. It always ends with .onion. Okay, so Silk Road Market and the Security Forum, two different URLs. You can see that they begin with Silk Road, but then you see they're followed with various numbers and letters. And of course, they end in .onion. Okay. So here's some tools for secure communications. Not all that's out there, it's just some. There's Tor-based email systems. And again, you don't even go and create your accounts unless you've already learned how to use your Tor browser. And these would be maybe email accounts you would create just for operating in, let's say, a private market. And you want to deal privately. Of course, you would never use any of your names or birth date or anything in your email address because you wouldn't want it to necessarily be linked to you. So these are two separate Tor-based email systems. One is your email address would be mailtotor.com, and on the second one, your address would be mailtor.net, I believe. But they don't actually. If you just go to mailtor.net, they don't have anything up there. They only have a website on the darknet, and that's the darknet address. But you could your mail address would be the mailtor.net. It wouldn't be that complex .onion. There's technology all of you can put. If you've got a smartphone, and this is also something that runs on computers, it's called Wickr, W-I-C-K-R. Go to wickr.com, and you can get the app for the iPhone, you can get the app on the Android, and this is a way to send encrypted messages, secure communication between parties. And you also set basically this message will self-destruct in so much time to the messages you send. So even if someone were compromised and the message and somebody accessed someone else's account, the messages are destroyed within the time that you say. So if you want a message to last for 10 minutes, 10 minutes after they read it, it's destroyed. It can't be recovered and it's gone. So it's a nice little system. It's probably one of the easiest technologies out there to implement. You could literally, anyone could put this on their smartphone today and start using it. Again, you gotta expand your network. You got to get other people to use it with you. You can't send something from Wickr to a regular, text message or email account or something. It's Wickr to Wickr. So you establish a Wickr ID, you have your friends establish a Wickr ID, and you guys send messages to each other on Wickr. And you know that your communications are secured. There's also ways of making encrypted phone calls. I use this technology. If you go to ostel.co, they provide voice over IP with the ZRTP TLS technology accounts for that, and they tell you which programs will work with their service on all devices. So you can, like for Android, the best one is what they call CSIP Simple. But again, if you go to the website, they'll have all the different apps for all the different types of phones and everything so that you can make encrypted phone calls. And again, you can only make encrypted phone calls with other people who do the same thing. So the people you want to have encrypted phone calls with, they got to go to ostel.co and set up an account. You go to ostel.co and set up an account, and then you both install the app, depending on which phones each of you has, and now you can call each other. Once you've exchanged each other's IDs and you know what ID to call on, now you can call each other, and your calls will be encrypted. Again, this is a little more difficult to implement because you have to go through and set up your protocols and everything within the program itself. It's not as simple as Wickr.com, but Wickr.com is just texting back and forth. The system for encrypted phone calls, it also will tell you and let you know and give you a special key so that when you connect with the person, if their key is the same as your key, you know that there's no one in between you. Okay, so there's a learning curve on competently implementing this technology. But if you want to get into the learning curve, go there. Go learn how to make encrypted phone calls. Everyone should be doing encrypted phone calls. There's a website there's a application known as Tor Chat I don't believe this has been implemented on smartphones yet. This is something that you would run from the computer. Again, it's similar to Wicker, but it runs completely through the Tor network, so it's completely anonymous. Whereas Wicker may be able to be tracked to your phone. It's just what's being sent between the phones is unknown, and what's being sent gets destroyed. Whereas Tor chat, if let's say you wanted to communicate with someone and you did not want them to necessarily be able to know who you are or where you're at, you'd want to use a technology that works on the Tor network, and Wicker does not operate on the Tor network. So again, if you're engaged in private market or engaged in a private contract with someone you don't necessarily trust, you would want to use that as the Tor chat type of technology as opposed to the Wicker technology, because the communications can never be linked to any particular individual or location through Tor. And then learning how to use Tor with anonymous webmail providers that are out there. I named 2 above, but there are more, and there's some that they don't exist on the darknet necessarily, but they at least allow the creation of anonymous accounts, and you can access websites through Tor. An example is safe-mail.net. It's much more reputable system, and if you use it with Tor and you don't put any personal details in it, and all the emails you send from it, you use PGP encryption, there's nothing more secure as far as email is concerned. And it can never be linked to a particular location. Now again, you got to learn the practices. You would never want to access this webmail and not be on Tor. Because if you're not on Tor and you access this webmail, now this webmail account's now been linked to your computer. And you never want that to happen if you're using that particular webmail account in a private market. Okay? And also learn how to use cloud storage with PGP technologies. You can also use, if you're more savvy, you probably already know, there's other ways of keeping encrypted file systems on cloud systems like Dropbox and Box.com, but PGP is a simple one. Now you can encrypt the file and upload it, and you know that even if someone gets access to your Dropbox or your Box.com account, all they'll get access to is a bunch of encrypted files. Those of you who are more savvy, you know you can use ENCFS and mount your cloud storage as a WebDAV, and everything would tunnel through encrypted, so everything would only be on there encrypted, but it would be on your computer as if it were just a regular folder. So those of you who are a little more savvy, you can use those types of technologies to keep all of your files encrypted all the time and never have any files that are not encrypted. I would add to this, well, yeah, because I don't think I mentioned this later, learning how to encrypt your file systems on your computer, encrypting your hard drive, so that without the passphrase, and again, you want to use a complicated passphrase, at least 12 digits, and you want to combine it uppercase, lowercase, symbols, and numbers. And even if somebody did get their hands on your computer or sees your computer or whatever, they can never get anything off of it. You got to, again, it's one of those technologies, it's widely available, and you just have to implement it. And again, if you don't know anything about it, you're going to want to research. And because really the best ones to go for are open source ones where you can see how they work. You know, I don't really trust, you know, Microsoft has a built-in encryption system. So I don't really trust Microsoft's system because it's not open source. I can't see how it works. And for all I know, they've programmed in a hole to where all you got to do is type in some command or implement some kind of control, and you have full access to all the encrypted files. I don't really trust Apple or Microsoft as far as I can throw them. So I'm really, when I'm dealing with security, especially at that level, I'm looking for open source implementations of technology. Because the open source, I can look into the code and see if there are any backdoors or holes in it that would allow someone to subvert the technology. So you may want to look into what's trusted by the savvy people out there, you know, and implement those types of technologies. Okay, as far as resources with regards to cryptocurrencies, we talked about cryptocurrency exchanges. My favorite is etc-e.com. Very reliable. I've used very large sums of Bitcoins on there. In fact, I've had large sums of Bitcoins deposited in their online wallet for more than 6 months and never lost a single Bitcoin. And they've been operating for years now. So out of all of the exchanges out there, I trust BTC-E the most. There's also Cripsy, Bitstamp.net, and there are various others. I mean, there's probably 30 or 40 large, or at least decent volume exchanges out there. We talked about online wallets. Again, it's not something I recommend, but if you want to look into it and you want to implement one and maybe just keep small sums in your online wallet, the best one, most reputable one, the one I would trust the most is blockchain.info. Really, they're the only one at this point that I would trust as far as an online wallet is concerned. Even though technically my BTC-E.com account was an online wallet and I have used it in that capacity, I consider it an exchange, a place where if I'm depositing Bitcoins on there, it's to do exchanges, to trade and to exchange Bitcoin for something else, or to exchange some other cryptocurrency for Bitcoins or whatever. Reputable escrow that I've used and that I've used for actually high amounts of cryptocurrency, and again, never had any problems, is BT Crow or BTCRow.com. They operate escrow, so it's the buyer and the seller. One of the parties initiates the transaction, and then they act as the intermediary to the transaction. You establish the terms and conditions of what fulfillment of contract will look like, and when fulfillment of contract happens, they release the funds from one party to the other. So, excellent system. Mixers. And again, this is one I've used and I trust, and I've used with large quantities of cryptocurrency worth tens of thousands of dollars, is bitcoinfog.org. Reputable, fast, probably one of the oldest mixers out there, and works flawlessly. So it's something that is that I've actually used on several occasions. First, again, to establish the trust, at first I was using small amounts just to see, am I going to get back what I put in? and I never had any problems, even when I needed it for transactions like that. We talked about using debit cards. There's a service out there. You can go to bitplastic.com, and there you can open an account anonymously, fund it with Bitcoin anonymously, and get anonymous debit cards. You can use at the grocery store and other things like that. So that you could, again, it's one of those things that we can completely move into our private currency system. And if there was still something that you absolutely had to have a U.S. dollars for, you would just use a BitPlastic. And in that way, again, you're holding out. There's as little dollar usage going on as possible, which would, again, strangle the central banking system. Gold and silver. You can actually acquire gold and silver anonymously and securely using cryptocurrencies. These are just two examples. There are actually several sites out there that offer gold and silver in exchange for cryptocurrency. There's one, coinafool.com and agoracommodities.com. For news and information with regards to cryptocurrencies, coindesk.com is probably the best source. In my experience, they are. And so I highly recommend them. They're quite a large reach. I don't know if they're staff writers or what it is, but there's just a lot of, it's a great resource that brings together all news with regards to, and information with regards to cryptocurrency. And then there's, buying cryptocurrency, buying Bitcoin. Coinbase.com is one. Verwox is one that if you know what you're doing, you can actually do it anonymously. Now on Verwox, you'll get taxed a bit more than you would on like Coinbase, and it's going to take you some time. So if you're looking to get large quantities of Bitcoins, it'll take you, a month to get large quantities of Bitcoins, because they started off to where they build trust. Again, because of the method by anonymously acquiring them through them, they've had to establish trust because of how much fraud people in the United States perpetuate. So basically, they trust people from almost all other countries, but if you're wanting to anonymously use some form of U.S. account, and again, there's ways of creating those accounts anonymously, they're gonna test you. They're gonna make sure you're legit. So they're gonna only allow you to do small transactions for months. And then once you're trusted, then you're able to do larger transactions. And then, of course, there are actually Bitcoin ATMs all across the country, all across the world, where you can put cash in and get Bitcoins out. So you want to learn how to use a wallet, learn how to print up a QR code of your public key, not your private key, your public key. That's how you get paid. Or have the app on, there's, at least on the Android, you can get the Bitcoin app on your phone so that you can actually just, you go to the Bitcoin ATM, put some cash in, you hold up your phone to the little camera on the ATM, and it sends the money to your account. So very easy to use. And again, and they go both ways. You can actually also, they have ATMs where you send Bitcoin to the ATM and it puts out cash. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the first two resources we had listed, which were the MIC training program, which is one, and then the second one, which is the MIC privacy technology online training. Okay, so first we're going to look at the MIC training program. MIC training program, or Mastery in Commerce, is what we call it. This has two different aspects. There's a mastery of self aspect to it and a mastery of private and public commerce aspect to it. So the mastery of self element, first we focus on the first 2 weekends of this training are completely focused on your personal transformation and mastery of your own self, your own being. So you empower yourself with the various principles and practices, insights and experiences for effective manifestation and realization of your vision, dreams, and your intention. And also experience transformation and being highly effective in your capacity to communicate, to collaborate, to contribute, and prosper in your personal and professional relationships and partnerships. It's the new paradigm that we're moving into on this planet is one of partnership. So we see it as one of the most essential aspects to truly mastering commerce is first being able to master yourself. So a lot of people probably all people, have their own worst enemies. And so we found that the most effective way to have people really get this technology and to utilize it and to really take on the other aspects of this training with the necessary focus and commitment is to do this mastery of self element. Because so often people come with really no intention of doing any work. They just want some information. And unfortunately, this is an experiential training. You're not just going to be told about how to do things. You're going to be doing them. And if you don't do them, you're not going to learn it. You're not going to embody the information and the technology. So it's a hands-on, it's an experiential training. And those things that you will be hands-on with are the creation of private and public entities, because we learn in this program how to operate in both worlds, the private and the public, and how to interact, how to use your private entities through public entities, and the mastery of those techniques. Also the mastery of private and public contracts, and private and public currencies, and private and public markets. So the interactions of all these things, and it's hands-on. So you're doing. You're not just getting information. You're not just doing. We do many phone calls. We do webinars. We have weekends or 4 weekends where we get together. But the first 2 weekends deal with the mastery of self. The second 2 weekends deal with the mastery of commerce. So those weekends are when we actually physically get together in a location somewhere in the country, and then throughout the 6 months, it's an intense program. It's the equivalent of a full load in college. So imagine in college doing a full load, like 18 units, 20 units, something ridiculous. It is a lot of work if you're there to truly get all the elements, because a lot is presented in a short amount of time. Because 6 months may sound like a long time, but the amount of material covered and the new ground that you're going to be exposed to in this really takes there's a lot of reading, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of interaction, there's a lot of phone calls. It's an intensive program. It is not just you're going to get some data. It's not the nature of this program. The nature of this program is designed such that you embody the information and the knowledge and the wisdom that comes along with it. It's not just about having some information that you're going to store away somewhere and never truly understand and therefore never truly implement effectively. It's about having people be effective with this information. The only way to do that is through experience. We're going to do 2 calls coming up to give an introduction to this MIC training program. The first will be on Saturday, September 20th. It'll be at 4 p.m. Eastern. And the phone number and call ID are there on the screen. Phone number is 712-432-3066. Call ID 995-7056. There will be a second call on Tuesday, September 23rd. Now, they'll be similar calls. You don't have to be on both. They won't be the exact same because they never are, because it's question and answer. It's an open forum. So it will be different information, but if you can only make one should be sufficient. And then again, this is if you want an introduction and more information with regards to the program we just talked about. These are the calls to be on. Second call is Tuesday, September 23rd, 2014, 9 p.m. Eastern. And the phone number for that is the TalkShoe number, 724-444-7444, call ID 18856. Now, these are the dates of the upcoming MIC training program. Like I said, there are 4 weekends. So those are really the only dates you will have to leave home. Everything else can be done remotely. All the webinars and phone calls and everything else is you can do from your home, so you won't have to actually go anywhere. Whereas the first 2 weekends, you'll need to go to Albuquerque. First weekend is October 24th, 26th. Second weekend is November 20th to 23rd. Third weekend is January 23rd to 25th, Chicago. And the fourth weekend is April 24th to 26th, and that location is actually established by the participants. And of course, there's a lot, a lot that happens in between those 4 weekends. You can see the weekends stretch out from October of this year through April of next year, and everything that's in between. And believe me, it is intensive. If you're not truly committed to doing the work and being at the equivalent of like I'm, doing whatever I'm doing in life right now, and now I'm also doing a full load of a full load of college courses as far as work is concerned and education is concerned. And you can register online. You can either go to micmastery.net/trainings/mastery-training, or you could just go to micmastery.net and click on trainings. You'll get there and you'll find it. Or you can go to tax.io/MIC. That'll take you to the same location. Okay. So that is our Mastery in Commerce program. Now, there's also the Privacy Technology online training. And so here we're going to talk about what that incorporates. Now, this has everything to do with hands-on training of all the various technologies we talked about today, plus more. So it's a hands-on training in the effective use of PGP and GPG encryption technologies. So it's all done remotely. So you don't actually have to travel for this training. It's an online training. So it's basically, and it's intensive too. It's actually 12 weeks, and it's every week. So 1 day a week for 12 weeks for at least 3 hours is each webinar, plus you'll be doing work between each webinar. So it's another intensive one, but it's only 12 weeks. It's 3 months or 4 months. No, 3 months. Yeah. So you're getting a lot in a very short amount of time, but it's focusing on all these aspects of technology that we've talked about here today. You get a hands-on with PGP and GPG encryption technology. You get a hands-on of using the voice over IP ZRTP technologies for encrypted phone calls. So you're going to be doing it. You will be setting up the apps on your phones. And again, if you don't have a smartphone, you're going to either have to get one or you're not going to get it, because again, to really get this technology, it's about the experience of it. So you've got to be in the doing of it. You can't just attend the webinars and watch them and expect to really embody the information. You've got to be in the work of it. So you've got to be doing it. But it will be hands-on. It'll be literally showing you step by step each week, like how to implement each technology, how to use it effectively. There'll be hands-on training in effectively and safely and securely using the anonymity technologies we talked about, such as Tor or the darknet, various proxy systems and VPN, things like that. It'll be hands-on training in the effective use of encryption to secure your computer files and your cloud files, such as Dropbox or Box.com, and your smartphone. There's actually methods and ways of encrypting information on your phone as well. There's hands-on training in effectively using encrypted messaging systems, either from your computer or your tablet or your phone. It'll be a hands-on training in the essential practices for maintaining privacy and anonymity through the effective use of pseudonyms, handles, passwords, passphrases, things like that. So we also, not only do we implement all the technologies, but we go through how to effectively use them, the do's and the don'ts. If you're using Tor, you do not allow JavaScript to execute. And we show you how you turn that function off so that you are not exposed. We teach you practices of, if you're going to engage in a private market, the things you never do and how you always engage it, how you access it, when you access it, everything else. We give you all the do's and don'ts. It's a hands-on training in securely establishing and maintaining cryptocurrency wallets. So we focus on the Bitcoins, but you learn how to, create the wallet, maintain, run the software, send and receive funds. You learn how to encrypt your wallet, how to secure your wallet's location, how to take your wallet offline so that you can actually, put it in the form of paper. It's secured in the form of paper, and other things like that. It's also a hands-on training in effectively using cryptocurrencies in private commercial transactions. So again, it's how to use them in the markets and in transactions. Just the do's and don'ts, the little things. How do you get paid? What's the process? What's the procedure? How do you fund your own Bitcoin account? How to use, we also give, it's a hands-on training in using the actual exchanges, the currency exchanges out there. It's a hands-on training in using mixers, how to use the mixing services and things like that to obfuscate your private transactions, so that when you want to, truly do something in the private that you don't want to be traceable, like for instance, if you're selling, healing technologies or buying healing technologies that have had people thrown in prison because they were healing people, you may want to, keep every aspect of that transaction private, including mixing the funds, so that the funds are exposed as being a certain user in a private market. Well, being able to set security, like you've heard the term firewalls, right? So in buildings, as well as on networks, we have these things called firewalls that there's multiple places to stop the fire, so to speak. So you learn how to effectively utilize all the technologies in such a way that one acts as a fire break or firewall to another. And so if one fails, you've got all these other things in place that will allow you to maintain security and anonymity. Again, it'll be hands-on with cryptocurrency services such as the debit card systems and acquiring gold and silver. And it'll also be a hands-on training in the essential practices for maintaining privacy and anonymity while engaging in online private markets. Okay. And also, another part of this that isn't mentioned here is that you also will go over all the resources that are there in the dark net, that are out there, that are reputable, that have been around, that are well established, that function, and that where you can operate, transact business securely and privately. Okay, so there'll be 2 introduction calls on this training as well, this privacy technology online training, and it is the first call will be on Saturday, October 4th, 2014 at 4 p.m. Eastern. Again, it's 712-432-3066 number, call ID 995756. And the second introduction and information call will be on October 7th at 9 p.m. Eastern. And that is TalkShoe number 724-444-7444 now. And the call ID is 18856. Now, this is actually limited. Only a certain number of people can attend this training, just because it's hands-on and because we're working with every single individual to make sure they get the technology. We're limited in how many people we can actually take on at one time. So this one is very limited. Once we've reached our enrollment limit, that's it. We won't be able to get in for the next one. Whereas the other training, we have a much higher capacity than we do with this training. But this one, again, it's such a short time frame. So, 12 weeks is a very small amount of time to get down what we talk about in this training. Okay. And I don't know if I mentioned that the privacy technology training begins on Monday, October 27th, and so it would be every Monday. Okay, so the webinar would be every Monday. It's typically pretty late at night. Again, depending on the time zone you're in, but it'll be, if you're in the east, it's going to be late, and if you're in the West Coast, it should be around 7 p.m., 6 to 7 p.m. So if you're in the Pacific Coast, it may be a little early. I don't know if 6 p.m. is early for some of you, but it'll be the same time every month. Let me make sure. Yeah, it's every Monday for 12 weeks in a row. Okay, and it's all web-based. We'll need to be behind a computer because it's all webinar material. So we do a lot of interacting. So there's video that gets displayed because we're going to be working on phone. I thank all of you, and I hope to see and talk to some of you, or many of you, or all of you very soon. Have a good evening. Night.